Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Boundaries. In our division deep dives, we are now looking at our two East divisions. If you're new here, my name is Donovan, this is Brevin, and we are going to be looking at the Cowboys to start it off. So I will let our Cowboys fan talk about his own team.
Alrighty. The Cowboys didn't do a lot in free agency. Obviously, they got Eric Kendricks from the Chargers, and they got our old friend Ezekiel Elliott back. Um, in the draft, I think they lost a lot of things through free agency. I don't think they lost as much as people thought. They lost a lot of the guys that I think lost were more of rotational pieces. I think Tyron Smith was a big loss for them. But other than that, I think everyone else is a replaceable person on the roster that they did a pretty good job in the draft. The first guy in the draft that they selected in the first round was Tyler Guyton. I think he's going to easily slide into that starting left tackle. Then they took Marshawn Nealand in the second round. I think he's more of a like he might get some time this year, but I think he's more of the long-term replacement of DeMarcus Lawrence. And then I think Cooper Beebe, he'll be the starting center who they picked up in the third round. And then a guy that I've been hearing out of like mini camps and stuff, who's already the only rookie that's for sure starting is Maris Luafa from Notre Dame. He's the linebacker from Notre Dame. And obviously, the Cowboys struggled with stopping the run a lot last year. So I think getting a hard-nosed linebacker that can fly sideline to sideline, I really hope in this year and stopping the run. One thing I hope that they're able to establish before the season is finding someone, whether it's free agency or trade, someone that they can stick in there at defensive tackle because kind of hopefully Mozzie Smith makes that jump. But if he doesn't, then there's not a lot there.
Yeah, I think kind of like you said, they really didn't do anything. They assumingly, they felt like they were in a really good spot. You fill a couple holes that ends up showing up in the draft, at your left tackle with Tyron Smith leaving, a new center, stuff like that. So I wouldn't say they really got better. They didn't get worse. They're just hanging on. I think their big thing is they have a great roster. Now it just needs to perform in the playoffs. Like, you can't get much better than consistently winning your division. Like, you just, at that point, you have to find a way to win in the playoffs. I think a lot of that is going to fall now onto McCarthy and Zimmer's shoulders. Like, this is on you. If this roster doesn't succeed for another year, I think everything's going to be pointing at Mike McCarthy. And that, yeah, I think their roster is set up really well. I do like their depth at linebacker with Buddy Johnson and Overshown. I think those are two really great linebackers to have on your bench if those are your bench guys, or if they can kind of steal that starting spot from Clark. Right now, Clark is listed as a starter, but I could definitely see Overshown or even Buddy Johnson taking that by the end of the season. The D tackles is a worry. I think Mozzie Smith is a great fill-in, but with Mike Zimmer, you need two D tackles, in that 4-3 front. And also with a guy like Mozzie Smith, who is a more inside that A gap, when Zimmer likes to go his double A gap linebackers, is Mozzie going to be able to go out to that B gap and be successful, or are you going to need, a third D tackle getting extra reps in an already thin D tackle room is kind of scary. But yeah, I think this roster is in great shape, and I think they'll look really good this season. So we are going to move on to the Eagles. Eagles, Brevin's favorite team. Since this is kind of your division, I'll let you take this whole division.
Yeah, so the Eagles, I think they made some pretty good moves around the margins this year. They added obviously one of the better running backs in the league in Saquon from the division rival. They added Bryce Huff to replace Hassan Reddick, who they lost to the Jets in a trade. They also brought back C.J. Gardner-Johnson from the Lions, who they had a few years ago. And then in the draft, I think they filled a lot of some big needs on defense at defensive back with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper Jean. Their defensive back room, everyone thought it was going to be so good because they paid both their corners, but it kind of took a step back with I can't think of his name off the top of my head. Him going back and just not performing like he he did the year before to get that contract. So adding Quinyon Mitchell, the top cornerback in the draft, and not even having to move up for him was pretty big. And then Cooper DeJean falling into their lap in the second round was also pretty big. I also still think they have some question marks at linebacker for sure. They have two new ones. They added Devin White, which is Devin White still the same Devin White from the Super Bowl team, or is he fallen off a little bit? We'll have to see. But I still have questions at the defense, the middle linebacker position. There's safeties if depending on where they play Cooper DeJean, CJ Gardner at safety. I think they fixed that a little bit, but there's still some question marks there. But on offense, I think that's where they're set. They really don't have a lot of question marks anywhere. At receiver, they have one of the best receiving cores. They have one of the best tight ends. They have one of the best offensive line. The only place you could say a question is center, but they've had one that's been ready for this moment when Kelsey retires. They now obviously have one of the best running backs in the league. At quarterback, they have a really good quarterback for their particular system. We talked about that a little bit in a different podcast, but I think the Eagles they're set up for a big run this year for sure.
Yeah, I think you look at this offense that was already like a really great offense, then you turn around and you bring in Saquon Barkley. That's already enough to be like this offense is insane. But kind of some underrated people on this offense is like your rookies, Johnny Wilson. I mean, that's a red zone threat and a half. You have AJ Brown and Johnny Wilson. I don't know what defenses would do in the red zone. And then someone who's probably one of the best people with the ball in his hand in this draft, and probably one of the best I've ever watched coming out of Texas A&M, is Ainias Smith. Like if you put the football in his hands, it's likely something awesome is going to happen. And to have him as like your sixth option on offense is just kind of crazy. And so I think they're really set up for success. And then barring any like situations where you have an injury or you need to rest someone or anything like that, where some of these really stacked rosters can kind of hurt from that, the Eagles now have the depth where it just doesn't really matter, at least on offense. And then if you look at that defense, you would expect the defense to kind of come back to form. Last year was really weird with how everything turned out. It didn't really make much sense. I expect them to be a lot better this year, just because a lot of their young guys are a little bit older. And their linebacking core, I expect Dean to be a lot better. And if Devin White doesn't really work out and he doesn't get back to where he was when the Bucs won the Super Bowl, you draft someone like Trotter Jr. out of Clemson, who was one of the best linebackers in this draft. And I think he could work into that spot by the end of the year if you're not happy with White's performance. And then everyone was making fun of that secondary last year about how it went from like one of the best to one of the worst. And they went off on that. And you saw with the way they addressed it this offseason that they will not let that happen again. I mean, you look at their depth at corner, your seventh and eighth corner are Keely Ringo and Josh Jobe, two young guys who have a lot of potential. So I think if you're looking at this DB room, no matter who it ends up being out there, I think they're expecting them to succeed, because if Bradbury doesn't play well, he's out. If Mitchell's struggling, he's out. You know, you just have so many of these rotational pieces that you're going to find your top three corners and you're going to be able to run with it by the end of the year. I do think that the Eagles and the Cowboys are on a collision course for the top of this division. I think both teams have set themselves up where they both feel like this is the run, this is it. With that, that takes us to the Giants.
Okay, so the Giants. Some people thought, they maybe go J.J. McCarthy in the first round. Some people thought they'd go maybe try and get up into Drake May in the first round. Evidently, they sat and they took Malik Neighbors, one of the best, if not the best receivers in the class. I think that was a big problem with Daniel Jones. He might not be the greatest quarterback, but he didn't truly have a number one. So now giving him a true number one, I think it'll be interesting to see what he can do with that. I also like the safety out of Minnesota that they drafted in the second round. I think they needed to address the safety after losing that one guy to the Packers. I can't think of his name right now.
Xavier McKinney.
Xavier McKinney to the Packers. So addressing that position with of the young safety, one of the better safeties in the draft, was very important. Obviously, some losses that they had were recently they had Darren Waller leave. Did he do that much last year? No, because of injuries. So obviously he's a very big weapon and his potential was there, but I don't think the loss is that dramatic from what they really didn't lose much because he didn't play that much last year. Saquon, they lost him, but in the NFL, I think you can. There's a lot of running backs that can step in and fill a role. Obviously, they're not going to be Saquon, but they're gonna be productive running backs in the NFL. Other than that, I don't think the Giants did. They didn't do a ton in free agency. They didn't lose a bunch. They didn't gain a bunch. So I think they're still above the Commanders, but I don't think they're pushing for the top of the division for sure.
Yeah, I think the big thing is for the Giants is going to be that defense, that front of the defense more specifically. When you have a defense roster with Dexter Lawrence, Byron Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and then your middle linebackers are Orike and McFadden, I think you're set up for a lot of success on that side. That defense performed well last year without someone like Byron Burns, so you could only expect it to get better. I think the big thing this season is going to be looking at Daniel Jones healthy now and just, he's got to put his money where his mouth is. He does finally have some weapons in Neighbors, and I think it would be a travesty for the Giants if you don't see Hyatt out there on the field getting meaningful reps. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in that room, and last year he really didn't get that opportunity. So I think if he gets that opportunity, I think Daniel Jones will have probably the best weapons he's ever had as a quarterback with the Giants, minus, losing Saquon Barkley for Devin Singletary. But I think this offense is kind of set to be at least above average. So you would assume with a defense like that, you just need an offense that's not going to cost you games. And I think the Giants are kind of hoping that that's where they're at. Now, when you're looking at this division with teams like the Eagles and the Cowboys ahead of the Giants, is this enough to have a meaningful season this year? Probably not. But in terms of this roster and Giants fan, I think you would be looking at a pretty successful season. It's not going to be, I don't think you're going to be terribly disappointed with this team's performance, barring a Daniel Jones collapse. All right, our final team for this division would be the Commanders.
The Commanders, I actually think they hit the draft right on the head. They signed some in-division players. They signed the Cowboys center, and then they signed one of the Cowboys as an edge rusher. So those were two good signings. I think they kind of overpaid for both of them, in my opinion. But they're Dan Quinn guys, so he got his guys. I think he is going to be a beast for sure. People are comparing him to Lamar, but in my opinion, I think he can throw a little better than Lamar, especially right now where Lamar was when he came out of school. Then they got Jason Newton, the defensive tackle out of Illinois. I think he's going to be a big piece for that Dan Quinn defense. My favorite pick that they had was Mikey Sainristil. I watched some reports from the Commanders, and after Dan Quinn left Michigan, he simply said that that's one guy that he wanted to get. He's just he's a great leader. He's an offensive player, so on defense, he's got great ball skills. He'll come up and hit. He's a little undersized, so we'll see if that might affect him in the NFL. But he's just a dog, so he's going to play like that every single game. And at Michigan, it seemed like whenever they needed a play, Mikey was making a play, whether it was a pick, tackle, something around that aspect. And then another player that I think that is underrated is Ben Sinnott, how do you say that, the tight end out of K-State. I think by the end of the year, he'll probably be the starter for sure, if not at the beginning of the year. I picked him up in Dynasty, so I'm kind of hoping that as well.
Yeah, I think this Commanders team is interesting. You have Dan Quinn come in as a head coach. You bring in a Cliff Kingsbury as your offensive play caller, and then you go and draft someone like Jaden Daniels, and you bring in weapons like Austin Eckler and Luke McCaffrey, and someone like Ben Sinnett, it really puts you and Jaden Daniels in a place where you kind of expect to have a pretty successful season. And a lot of the time with these rushing quarterbacks, it's a lot easier to see them be somewhat successful in their rookie year just because it is a lot simpler offense. It is a lot less reliant on the harder things of football, of reading defenses, reacting to disguise coverages, throwing perfect balls. So rushing quarterbacks are in a lot easier position in order to find that success. Now, is it harder on your body? Is it more dangerous for the quarterbacks? Absolutely. But I think Jaden is in a great spot, especially with someone like Cliff Kingsbury to call plays. Even though his time with the Cardinals didn't go great, I still think he's a very good offensive mind. Your defense is interesting. You know, this Commanders defense a while back was one of those where you kind of feared and you were like, oh, if only the Commanders could figure it out on offense, they would be a pretty good team. This defense is in a good spot. And now coming into this with someone like Dan Quinn, you're looking at this defense and you don't feel super great about it anymore. I don't think it's a bad defense. I think there are a lot of holes where you look at it and you go, that's a really important hole. So are they going to be able to be successful against some of these better teams? You're in a very difficult division. You know, you're not in one of the easier divisions where an okay roster, you can still find success because of a couple big players having big games. That's not really the case for the Commanders. It's going to be a very difficult season for them, and I just don't think their roster is built out properly in order to handle that. I think they have a great linebacking core. I think their D-line is getting older and is struggling to continue to dominate at the same level that they were. That's why you bring in someone like Newton. And then the secondary is an interesting spot. I mean, I think every football fan has seen that picture of Emmanuel Forbes from this offseason, and you're like, that's a 12-year-old boy. So that's kind of nerve-wracking because it just seems like he keeps getting smaller and keeps losing weight somehow. So I think you're nervous as a Commanders fan. But I do think drafting Mike will definitely help that because, you know, if Forbes ends up being a bust because he is too small, you can kind of just hope that Mike can fill in that role and then you won't have a problem. But I think this team is, I think the floor and the ceiling are pretty close to each other in terms of at least for this season. So with that, we get to rank them. And so I'll start with my fourth place. I did go back and forth a little bit just because I think the Commanders and the Giants are kind of closer than some people may expect. And I just think that's purely based off of I could see this Commanders offense being more successful than Daniel Jones and the Giants this year just because of the fact that they are a rushing offense. But it's hard to bet against that Giants defense. I think their offense will be able to do enough win more games than the Commanders. So in fourth, I'm putting the Commanders.
I agree. I think Jaden Daniels in the long run obviously is going to be better than Daniel Jones, but I just think his rookie year he's just going to have a learning curve, and that Giants defense I think is just a little bit better than the Commanders, and I still don't think the Commanders have that great of weapons around Jaden Daniels that he's going to flourish in his first year, like maybe a guy like Caleb Williams. So I definitely got the Commanders at 4.
And then at 3, with that same sentiment, I have the Giants. You know, fourth place was battled, and Giants are obviously going to kind of be at third. I just think that I have little faith in Daniel Jones, and you're in probably the second toughest division in football with the Cowboys and the Eagles sitting atop your division. I don't really think as a Giants fan you can kind of expect to sniff the top of the division at all with this roster. And it's not a horrible roster, but just when you have two insane rosters ahead of you, it makes you look bad. So I think they're going to have to finish at third.
I agree. I think this division you can switch 3 or 4, you can switch 1 or 2, but the definitely have the Giants at number 3.
All right, with my second team, I'm putting the Cowboys. I do think that both of these teams will have great seasons. I don't think the Cowboys will fall off. I think they'll probably still be a 10-win season. But when I look at the makeup of these rosters going into this season, I think the Eagles improved and the Cowboys stayed in the same spot. And the first and second positions are probably going to come down to like one or two games. Definitely the head-to-head matchups are going to be huge. And I just think that the Eagles are more suited to take the division, especially with, I don't know how much I trust Mike Zimmer's defense, if he will be a better play caller than Dan Quinn. I know Dan Quinn's big issue was his defense seemed really only to be successful when the Cowboys were up big, where if that's not the case, he struggled. And I don't know if Mike Zimmer's going to have that same issues, but I also don't think Mike Zimmer's defense is going to be as good when the Cowboys are up as Dan Quinn's. So I think it'll be interesting, and I think the Cowboys may stumble a few games, and that'll cost them the division.
So I kind of think the opposite. I think the Eagles, they did improve, but I think because they were terrible last year, their only way they could go was up. Um, I think the Cowboys improved in ways that some of their players are going to be better. In the ways that they were bad, I don't think they can get any worse. They can only get better. Obviously, stopping the run, I think the only way they can go is up. In the run
I
game, the only
suppose.
thing they can do is go up. And I think they did improve in those areas, especially on offense in running the ball. I think Cooper Beebe is definitely going to help their run game for sure, and that's just going to take some more pressure off their pass game. They had one of the best pass games in the NFL, so adding that center to that run game, and with Zach Martin actually participating in camp this year, he's going to be back to his Hall of Fame self. You got an All Pro right next to him, so you should be able to own the A gaps and be able to take some pressure off of Dak and lean on the run game in those bigger games. On defense, if I can't remember, I can't remember his record for sure, but Mike Zimmer has a winning record against the Shanahan tree. And that really got me excited because that's one thing where Dan Quinn, he's got a losing record against the Shanahan tree. And the biggest thing with Dan Quinn is like you said, when the Cowboys are winning and like they're up in games, that's when Dan Quinn's at his best because he can unleash his pass rush packages and everything else. Where I think Mike Zimmer is gonna be more like he's gonna hold people accountable. He's gonna put Micah in better situations, I believe. I think they're gonna be better and more physical against the run with Zimmer. So I think in that aspect they're going to be better, but you can't knock the numbers. And in this division, the Cowboys and Eagles have owned the division mostly, but there's hasn't been a back-to-back winner in like the last 15 years. So I'm going to go the Cowboys at 2, but I do think they're going to split games, so it could get them down to one game in the division.
That puts the Eagles at the top for both of us. I think that was also one thing I thought of was, just the history of the division where it's not the same team winning it back to back years. So, and that's not like a telltale sign of, oh, the Cowboys are definitely not winning it. But I just think it shows how close this division has always been, no matter whether all four teams are subpar or all four teams are good, or it's like 2-2 like it kind of has been these past couple of years and going into this year. But I do think there's a close look for these Eagles and these Cowboys team, and I honestly I wouldn't bet on who would win it. I think it's really a toss up, but I do think the Eagles are more primed to have a lot better success this. All right, with that we move on to the Bills, and we move on to the rest of the AFC East. The Bills, you know, coming into this offseason when they kind of unloaded everything, unloaded all those older, bigger contract guys, I kind of thought, oh boy, this Bills team is going to be in for a struggle. They actually did a pretty good job of kind of filling in all the holes they did create when they did that. Now, is the team the same Bills as before, as people are acting like it is? No, it's not. Do I think they'll be a terrible team? No. But people still have them as like a top 10 team in the NFL, and I just don't see how you can look at this roster versus the other rosters in the NFL, let alone the AFC, and assume that this team is going to be competing for the Super Bowl this year. You have Josh Allen, and you have some interesting weapons this year. You still have James Cook, who kind of came into his own last year. You have Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, and you bring in someone like Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel, and then you have two backups like MVS and even Chase Claypool, who apparently they said has been playing really well at camp, which maybe he's got a new home and he's actually back to his old self. I don't know what happened with him, but I just think that this offense is going to rely a lot on Josh Allen just doing incredible things and being perfect every game. And in an AFC where these teams are stacked on both sides of the field, this Bills team I don't see competing like other people are saying they're going to. And I think it's just kind of we love Josh Allen. We love what Josh Allen has become. So we're just going to assume the Bills are going to stay good. And I just don't see that being the case. Even on this defense, I think this defensive line is in a really good spot. They're young. They've finally come into their own. So I think the defense has that going for them. But at the linebacker spot, you have Matt Milano coming off a pretty serious injury and then no one else. And then your secondary is where it's probably taking the biggest hit. You lost Poyer and you lost Hyde, and you did not replace them very well. You have someone like Rasul Douglas, which a lot of people like, but I don't like him as your top corner. I don't want Rasul Douglas going against the number one wide receiver on a team. I would be really excited to see him as my number 2, but as my number 1, I think my secondary is kind of in an interesting spot. And I think the rest of the secondary is decent. But again, when you run into some of these teams that you're going to have to face, they're not going to be able to stop anyone. And you're going to rely heavily on that pass rush, which is very 50-50. Some games, your pass rush will be able to dominate. Then you get into a game where a ref doesn't want to call any holdings. The offensive line learns that. And by the second half, you have no pass rush and you're going to get diced up in the secondary. A lot of these teams that only have a front 7 have found that to be the issue. If you can't get a pass rush, your defense is not going to stop a soul. And I think the Bills may be in that situation. Got anything to add? You're muted.
I think you hit everything on the head pretty much. They lost a lot. I think they brought in some young guys that might be able to, hold on to the rope, but I don't think they're going to be contenders by any means. Especially, obviously, the Chiefs still own them when they had a better roster, so they can imagine they still own them now. They're pretty hyped on Keon Coleman. It remains to be seen with these big receivers. But I think he's got Josh Allen, so I think he should be good. I did see that stuff on that one receiver as well. You just can't believe anything you see in July.
Mm-hmm. Everybody looks good in camp. So that takes us to the next team in this division, which we are going to go to the Jets. The Jets are another one of those teams that you're seeing in the top 10. And from fans of football, I've heard and I've seen a lot of people who are kind of annoyed with the Jets being up there. Everyone's like, we're sick and tired of seeing the Jets. They're never good, whatever. But to that same aspect, they didn't have Aaron Rodgers last year. So, you saw all of that hype for the Jets, and then they kind of backfired. So now going into this season, seeing the hype again, it may make you frustrated and annoyed. But the fact still stands, this defense is very good, and you're hoping that you're going to get an entire season of Aaron Rodgers. And so I think this Jets defense does deserve the hype this Jets team deserves the hype and the expectations that it's gotten this season, even though it may be a little annoying just because of the past seasons, how they've ended. but I do think it is valid. I mean, you look at this offense, they even got better from last year. So to say that if this team was expected to be a top 10 team last year and then coming into this season you would expect them not to be, I think that's kind of ridiculous. You get an Aaron Rodgers, which it seems like he's going to be back and fine. You have Breece Hall still. You bring in someone like Braylon Allen, which is kind of unfortunate. I was kind of excited for Allen to get, a starting role. I thought he was going to be a beast. Now he's got to back up Breece Hall, and they got to split carries. I think they'll be a dominant backfield together, but it's just kind of unfortunate because it kind of caps their both how their careers could end up. You bring in a weapon like Mike Williams. Even though he is injury prone, I think he's very dominant when he is on the field. And if he does get hurt, you have Corley, you have Allen Lazard to kind of fill in his missing production when he is hurt. You have a decent tight end room. I think Aaron Rodgers, whatever tight end he plays with, the tight end's going to be good just because of how great Aaron Rodgers is, so you don't need a dominant tight end at that spot. You do fix your O-line a little bit, and then the spots where you do have injury concerns on this O-line, you have brought in a couple people to back up, where if someone does go down, it's not the end of the world, right? You get a rookie in Ola. You have someone like Max Mitchell, who's a good rotational piece at guard. So I think your offense is set up for success as long as Aaron Rodgers is on the field. That is going to be a big key. And then this defense I think it just keeps getting better and better every year. You have you look at this D-line and you're looking at the depth of it. You have McKinley all the way back here as your third end. And McKinley is probably a rotational piece, definitely on any decent team. And he's barely going to see the field with this team. Is kind of crazy to think about. Your linebackers played great last year. I think they stay there. And then your secondary has been really well. They've really kind of outplayed what people expected from them. I mean, everyone expected Sauce Gardner to be great, but the rest of these guys are kind of overlooked people who have come into their own and played really well and became a great unit together. So I think this Jets team is set up really well, and they just have to stay healthy. There's a lot of pieces, especially on the offensive side, where you're like, great player, injury prone. Great player, injury prone. So you just need a blessing from the injury gods to not let that happen. Your thoughts?
No, I agree. Obviously, the big thing for the Jets this offseason was to kind of fix the O-line. I think they did that. They got 2 older tackles, but they drafted some youth in the draft with Olu, like you said. I like the pickup of Mike Williams. If he comes back healthy, he's gonna be a really good number 2, number 3 receiver for him. I think Garrett Wilson, I thought it last year when I drafted him for a second round in fantasy, and it kind of didn't work out for the best. But if Rodgers can stay healthy this year, I think they're going to be one of the top duos in the league. And then if they can figure out the situation with Hassan Reddick, that'll be valuable as well.
And that run game with Breece Hall and Allen is going to take a lot of pressure off Rodgers if he is still kind of slow coming off that injury. If he's not 100% back, they could really spend the entire regular season just pounding the rock with them and just get Rodgers to the playoffs. Like, they don't have to rely on Rodgers to win games anymore, especially with this line.
And don't forget about the GOAT Isaiah Davis either.
Yeah, he's definitely fallen behind now in this depth. All right, our next team is I can use my brain, the Patriots. I think the Patriots were definitely well deserving of the 2nd overall pick. This is a roster that is struggling, and you lose the greatest head coach of all time. Raven, go see. Go. See. Go. All right. You lose the greatest head coach of all time. And when we look at this defense, we can kind of start there because not a lot has changed. They're all still, a lot of your key pieces are here. A lot of your great players are over here. My concern for this defense is what will the impact be with Belichick gone? Like, Jabril Peppers played great last year, but with Bill gone, is he going to be good now? You know, is Matthew Judon going to go from one of the best edges to a pretty good edge? Like, are all these guys going to kind of take a step back? And if the Patriots defense is taking a step back from being the second worst team last year, I can't imagine how much worse it's going to get this season for them. They need to continue to perform, and I think they expect that out of their head coach Mayo. I do expect them to continue to hope that they assume that defense is going to stay the same. And I think they're really relying on that because when you get to this offense, this is where things really get ugly. Jacoby Brissett, he is he's going to be a great fill in until May is ready. Ramondre Stevenson is a very good running back. I do think he needs a partner in the backfield. You bring in Antonio Gibson to do that. My problem is I kind of feel like Stevenson and Gibson kind of play the same. So you really don't have that dynamic backfield. You just have more of a Ramondre fill-in when Gibson's out there, which isn't the end of the world. There's two ways to approach a backfield. Either you get identical running backs so you don't have to change, or you get two opposite running backs so they can do things separately. So the Patriots taking it where they want kind of two similar running backs, even though Stevenson is a little bit bigger and runs a little bit harder than Gibson in terms of they're both kind of receiving backs, they're more finesse. They run along the same lines of that. When you get to this wide receiver core, I just see a bunch of third option wide receivers. Kendrick Bourne, Douglas, Osborne, Juju, even Rager, Thornton. I mean, if you were to tell me that those players were the third option on a team, I would really like that for them. But they're fighting to be the number one pass catcher on a Patriots team. Like, you're going to struggle catching the ball. You draft someone like Baker and Polk, and you hope that they'll become the number one options. But Baker's, coming from UCF, you don't have high expectations for him coming out of college. And then Polk was, he wasn't the number one option on his college team. Granted, he was behind a great wide receiver, but where does that put him when he gets to the NFL? Is he actually going to reach number one potential, or is his highest potential just being a number two option? So I think the Patriots are really going to struggle offensively. They're really going to have to lean on Ramondre to just be able to carry the ball, move the rock, control the game that way. And if they are going to win games, they're going to have to win games ugly and barely. They're going to have to shut down people. And if you get to a game where you can't shut down people, I think the Patriots are just going to get walked on.
I think they didn't do a lot. They brought back their offensive tackle. I kind of like a few pieces in the receiving core, like you talked about Polk. I don't know if you've seen that thing on Baker from the draft, but he said that he is the best receiver in this class. So I love that confidence. But they like you said, they don't just have a true number one. I think they have in those two, they could have a 2 and a 3, and some other pieces they could have a 2 and a 3. So if they went out and got a guy like Brandon Ayuk, they're a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But as it sits right now, I think they're going to struggle, especially I think May out of the gate, if he starts right away, or when he does get the chance this year, I think he's going to struggle right away. I think his campaign is going to be more next year. And that's just my opinion. I think he's going to be a good quarterback, though, to a certain extent, especially in that Patriots, if they keep that same DNA led by their defense, and then their offense is, not a terrible offense, but not an elite offense by any means. On defense, like you talked about, Bill Belichick, he's always been known for having good defense. So where does that go with him being out the door?
Yeah, I think Polk and Baker are in really good spots where if their max potential is a number one wide receiver, this is probably the best place to get there because you don't have to compete with an established receiver. Like if Polk or Baker start balling out, Bourne, Douglas, KJ, they're all just going to keep falling down the depth chart, or down Brissett's eyes, and Brissett's going to be looking for Polk. He's going to be looking for Baker, whoever pops off. And then along with that, you have an opportunity coming in as a rookie wide receiver to build a relationship with your fellow rookie quarterback. So then next year, when May does come in, whatever, either Polk or Baker, whoever he's built that better relationship with, then you could see them really becoming that number one. So I think they're in a great spot to earn that, but it's risky. Just, as a Patriots fan, you're just sitting and waiting for that to happen. If that doesn't happen, you're 2 years later and you still don't have a number one wide receiver. So, and I know the Patriots aren't used to having struggling rosters, so it could probably get very frustrating as a Patriots organization and as a fan if you're just waiting for these people to develop and you're struggling a couple years and they don't develop. I think Patriots fans could start raising hell. But that gives us our last team, the Miami Dolphins. I think this Dolphins roster from top to bottom is kind of insane. I would say it's probably one of the best in the NFL. I mean, we just look at this running back room. You have Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, and then you bring in and you draft someone like Jalen Wright, who is considered one of the most explosive running backs in this year's draft. So you have three insanely explosive running backs that can just kind of go in, rotate, and always be the freshest person on the field. You now have another year of Tua and Mike McDaniels together, just building that rapport, becoming better together. You bring in someone like Odell, who has been trying to fill roles as like number one wide receiver since he's left Cleveland, right? He did it in LA, then he got injured. He goes to the Ravens and tries to fill that and doesn't do a great job. So now he gets to come to Miami where he's the third option, where everyone's kind of like defenses will have forgot about him, and now he can kind of flourish as that number 3 role and kind of come back to where he feels great about. I see they bring in someone like Anthony Schwartz, who is insanely fast but couldn't catch the ball in Cleveland. I'm sure somehow Mike McDaniels will work his magic and somehow Schwartz will be an insane weapon for them, like he was supposed to be in Cleveland with his speed. Your tight ends, again, when you have a system and you have your tight end is the last option in your system in terms of your talent, you don't have to have one of those insane tight ends. So I think Jonnu Smith is going to be able to really flourish in this offense. Your offensive line is still improving very well. They really struggled when Tua first got there, and I think they've slowly gotten better, and I think they continue to get better. Then you get to this defense, and you have a front where I kind of think it's kind of crazy. Their front seven is one of the probably the best constructed front sevens I've seen. You just look at the outside linebacker depth. You have your first round pick and Chop Robinson, who is going to have to be a rotational piece, and everybody was super excited to see Chop coming out of this draft, and everyone kind of thought he would be like this insane candidate, this kind of sleeper for defensive rookie of the year, and then he gets drafted by Miami, and he's going to have to be getting rotational minutes until Bradley Chubb is gone. And that's just the way things look. You bring in someone like Shaquille Barrett, who was a starter all the way up until this year, and now he's going to be a rotational piece. And you draft someone like Kamara as your third option at outside linebacker. And he was one of those people coming into the draft where people were like, you need to pick him. In the late rounds, he's a beast. He's just kind of overlooked because he went to Colorado State. And he's ending up here, and he's way down the depth chart again. Your linebackers are great in terms of your off-ball linebackers, and then off the bench you have someone like Anthony Walker, who was a stud, and then he got hurt, and he's kind of struggled coming back last year, but I think, 2 years off of a major injury, he'll be good again. Channing Tindall, who is a really good linebacker, who is just kind of falling down the depth chart. When he gets minutes, he's been really good. And then your secondary is improved, and you have someone like Marcus May coming off the bench. I just think this roster is built so well that there's no reason they can't perform. Last year they come to the playoffs, They play the Chiefs. It's snowing, whatever. They struggle. I don't think you can have a blunder like that again. I think if you're the Dolphins, you have to make some sort of run. If you lose to the Chiefs again, but it's in the conference championship, I think it's a different story. But you can't lose round one to the snow because everyone was saying, Miami's a fair weather team. This offense can't be sustained if anything is difficult. And then the first snow game you get in a difficult scenario against a good team, you blow it. So I just think this team now needs to live up. There's no more building. There's no more growing. There's nothing left for this Dolphins team to do other than be successful, or you may be having to look at figuring out how you're going to change moving forward. Because if you can't be successful with this roster, then I don't know if you ever get over that hump. You're muted. That's twice in one video.
I know. I think this is definitely one of the better rosters in the AFC for sure, and probably in the NFL. Obviously, there's some question marks with Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb is coming back from ACL injury. But like you said, they did bring Chop Robinson, who I really liked in the draft. Shaq Barrett, he's getting up there in age, so he kind of fell off last year. But if he's a rotational player, I think he'll be pretty good. So as long as Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb come back healthy and come back to be the player that they were, especially Jalen Phillips, he was becoming one of the more dominant edge rushers before he wasn't ACL, it was his Achilles last year.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can both come back healthy, I think this defense is definitely going to take off for sure. Another question is you could question their interior. They lost Christian Wilkins. They brought in Neville Gallimore. They brought in Calais Campbell. What is Calais Campbell? His age, I don't know what he did a lot in Atlanta last year, but those are the only two questions at linebacker. They're solid at corner. They're solid at safety. They're really solid. Bringing in Jordan Poyer as well on offense. We obviously know what they can do. Is Tua going to take that next step and be elite, or is he going to continue down the, he's a good quarterback, but is he going to take that next step? Is all I'm saying. And then obviously at receiver you got Jalen Waddle, Odell. Their third is Odell. If that's your three, you're probably satisfied, especially if you get a healthy version of Odell. And then at tight end, Jonnu Smith, I think they simply just go look at 40 times and the fastest player at every position, and they put him on this roster. And then on offensive line, hopefully Teron Armstead can stay healthy, and they lost Robert Hunt. But as long as Teron Armstead can stay healthy, they're pretty solid at most of the positions at offensive line as well.
All right. With that, we started our number 4 spots. I'll let you go first on this one.
Number 4, I am going to go with the Patriots. And there's not a lot of explaining I need to do for that.
Yeah. The Patriots are my number 4. I think that's kind of obvious. I think their ceiling is the 4. I don't even see a way in a world where they get third in the division, barring a major injury to one of these other teams. So who's your third team then?
At number 3, I am going to go with the Buffalo Bills. I think they're still going to be very competitive. I hope they keep feeding their running back as I have him in Dynasty, so that would be very beneficial. I'm not on the biggest hype train of Josh Allen. Obviously he's a good quarterback, but I don't think he's that Mahomes tier, or that Burrow tier that people try and put him up in. So I think, they in the AFC it's going to be tough, and especially in this division it's going to be tough. And they could, obviously, if Josh Allen has an MVP season, they could easily be the number 1 in this division. But as of right now, on paper, I'm going to put them at number 3.
Yeah, I also have them at my number 3. I was kind of, even though I'm surprised with how good the roster does still look, I just don't think it's that good of a roster anyway, especially to be getting these top 10 teams in the NFL by a lot of these analysts and a lot of these TV people. I just think that's kind of like the Josh Allen hype train. The Bills have been up there for so long, they need to stay up there. And I just don't see that as true. I think this roster is really in a middle ground of, they partially rebuilt. They tried to rebuild and stay winning, which is always one of the hardest things to do. But the only way to do it is to have Josh Allen be incredible. But you've now switched to an offense where it's more run heavy. You're 2 tight ends. You're a lot slower paced offense. So that makes it even harder to win games completely off of Josh Allen's abilities. So I just don't think this team is built to succeed, especially with these other 2 teams in their division. Oh, who are you going to put it to?
I'm at number 2. I'm going to put the Dolphins. I think they're on a good day, they're the number 1 team in the AFC, and on a bad day, they could fall a lot of ways. I just think they're pretty inconsistent on both sides of the ball. I think they improved for sure from the draft this year, but I just don't know. They just, in my gut, I feel like they're just gonna. I just don't know if they're gonna take that next step. Tua's got that contract situation hanging over his head. How far out into the season does that go? Does that become a distraction? Who knows? And the reason for putting my 2 is simply just because they're inconsistent, in my opinion.
I'm gonna put the Jets at 2. I just think, and I don't think it's really anything against the Jets. I think the Jets are in a great spot to make some sort of playoff push. I definitely think they can win the division. Just when I look at this Dolphins team, it's just hard to say that they won't win the division. It's one of the most insane rosters anyone's ever put together. And when you have someone like Mike McDaniels as the head coach, who I think is kind of head and shoulders better than Robert Saleh, even though Robert Saleh's defense has performed very well, and that's necessarily his side of the ball. The offense isn't his fault. I just think as a collective, this season, I think Mike McDaniel's team is going to be more prepared, more ready, and I think they're more suited to outperform the Jets. I think the Dolphins can slow the Jets down. I don't think the Jets can slow the Dolphins down. And I think that's going to kind of come down to it when we talk about these divisions and these head-to-head games and these divisional games where you're playing a lot of the same opponents. I see the Dolphins being more successful than the Jets. But yet again, we're talking about Aaron Rodgers, so Aaron Rodgers can just win whatever game he wants. Will he still be like that? We'll see. But if he is still on that same level, then the Jets could definitely take this. So at your number 1, you have the Jets. Anything more?
Yes. I think as long as Rodgers comes back and he's healthy and he's Rodgers, I think the Jets are definitely contenders for sure. That defense is solid, and I think Rodgers to Garrett Wilson is going to be a special tandem to watch this year.
I kind of gave my piece about the Dolphins, the difference between the Dolphins and the Jets. Both of these divisions, I think you got kind of your top 2 and your bottom 2 in both of these divisions. I think either of these divisions can go either way. We shared that same sentiment in terms of these divisions are one of the 2 that are up in the air this year. There's a couple where they are pretty solidified. You know who you're going to expect to win it. There's a couple where all the teams are so good that it's hard to pick. And then there's a couple divisions where some of the teams are so bad you don't know who to pick. So I think this division is very up in the air because of how good these top 2 teams are on both divisions, both east sides. So I think it'll be fun to watch. If you're a fan of one of these teams, I think you're in for a very exciting season and maybe a heartbreaking season. But other than that, we do thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'm actually wearing the merch today. So one of the social shirt. So if you don't have one of those, make sure to go to our website. It's hiddenoorderathletics.com/store, or you can just click on the drop-down tab on the homepage and go get you some of that. Remember, once we hit 100 subscribers on YouTube, we will release a special collection to celebrate that on there. So thank you for watching. See you next video.